Hello, I'm Deacon Harold, and this is The Prodigal Life. And I'm joined, as usual, by Nick and Ellen. And we are here to help bring you to intimate, personal, loving, and life-giving communion with Jesus Christ and the Catholic faith.
Oh, Deacon, you are so dynamic. Just the way that you say things. We're going to be talking today about some stuff that's a little uncomfortable, maybe some mildly morbid stuff, but hopefully stuff that we can redeem from its morbidity into something joyful. What are we talking about here, Ellen?
We're going to talk about dying with grace.
Ooh, okay.
Suffering, euthanasia, medically assisted suicide, things like that are, happening all over our world. We'll share if there's any personal testimonies, and then we're going to talk about, how suffering can be redemptive. And we're going to talk about, people that may take their own lives, so suicide could be thrown in there a little bit too, and about how God is outside of time, so that there is some grace and mercy. We call it divine mercy, and just kind of introduce people into that. But first we need to get the church's teachings with regard to those issues.
Yeah, so basically all life is God's. All life belongs to God. All life was created by, we co-create with God. As human beings, he allows us to participate in his ability to give new life. But ultimately, all life belongs to God.
Correct.
So therefore, God can do with that life whatever he wishes. But we have to respect the fact that God is the author of life, not us. So that we belong to God. Right. And so our bodies are temples of the Holy Spirit. And so we have to respect the right to life from the moment of conception, when that person comes into being, until natural death. Yeah. All right. So that's the life cycle, moment of conception until natural death. And so we have to respect and protect all life, no matter how it came into existence. No matter what state that life is in, we have no right to take someone's life, an innocent life, because we believe that person, their value is diminished because of some illness or some birth defect or whatever the case may be, because they're old, because they're no longer, according to them, useful to society. So we cannot let society begin to dictate the dignity of human life, because what it does, it loses its dignity. We no longer see the person the way God sees them. We begin to see the person as disposable. And that's a huge problem, especially when it comes to these medical issues that we're talking about today.
Medical issues, yeah. So it's hard, because a lot of people, and I know in certain countries they're passing laws right now, I think even in Canada, where people are able to medically, in Sweden, I think too, they're able to, choose to die instead of to live. And
so that's a good point. Let's talk about the distinction between euthanasia and assisted suicide. Okay,
they're very different.
Euthanasia is when a doctor or something like that takes your life, all right, or they euthanize you without your knowledge or consent. Right. For example, when my mom moved to Oregon, my mom was already permanently disabled, and we were putting together, she wanted to put together her funeral plans and what readings she wanted and stuff like that. Mommy, I said, I don't want to think about that, but she goes, no, son, we have to do this. So but one of the things we did, we were putting the medical, she was giving me power of attorney to make medical decisions. And what she was deathly afraid of, because we're in Oregon, which is a state that assisted suicide. She was confused about what assisted suicide, euthanasia, but she was afraid that if she goes into the hospital, that some doctor was going to kill her because they didn't think her life was worthy anymore. Or you lived a good life already, making an objective decision without her knowledge or consent. That's euthanasia. Okay. Assisted suicide is when a doctor or physician prescribes medications where you take your own life. So that's
aiding and abetting,
assisted
basically.
Suicide.
Right.
Yeah. So we make the distinction between euthanasia and suicide.
Right.
Yeah.
So with that going on, and we know that it's wrong, but people are still choosing to do it. And I think the major reason I think why people do it is to avoid suffering. And suffering, as we've already talked about in another episode, but we'll touch on it a little bit today. Suffering, even though sometimes it can be very painful, and there are numerous saints throughout history that have suffered terribly with illnesses and maladies and deformations and everything else. But it doesn't mean that you should give up and lose hope, because I think it speaks directly to despair, which of course comes from, the devil. So how do we encourage, because we're all going to go through this in our life. We're all going to have people that have died. I mean, my mother, we did hospice with her, and her death, it was very painful. She had lymphedema, which is, you can barely touch the skin, and it was a horrible death. She was bleeding, and it was, but my brother and I and my father and my brother, we took care of her until she passed, but she could have very easily called a doctor, or done something to end that, so she wouldn't have had that suffering. But she didn't choose to do that. She chose instead to suffer. And being as faithful as she was to her faith, I honestly believe that she did it with redemptive suffering, which is a beautiful thing that you can do as Christians and Catholics. Anybody really can offer their sufferings, hopefully to help another, or somebody that's gone before them. But it's a big topic, and I'm not sure where to go.
Deacon,
can you define the suffering?
Break that down for us. Like, what makes something redemptive suffering?
Yeah. So the thing is, the reality is, everybody's going to die, and everybody's going to suffer. There's no way you can get through this life without those two things. At some point, everybody is going to suffer. The problem is, in our culture, is that we live in a society that says suffering is meaningless, therefore we should avoid it. So that's where things assisted suicide, that's where euthanasia comes in.
Fantasy.
Right?
Everything is pleasure.
But the Catholic principle is like, no, it's not about bypassing suffering, avoiding suffering because it's meaningless. It's about finding meaning in the suffering that's unavoidable. See, so the Catholic Church turns it around, finding meaning in the suffering that's unavoidable. So when you're suffering, because there's people watching this podcast that are in chronic pain. They literally woke up in pain this morning. They're in pain right now as they're watching, and they're going to be in pain tonight when they go to bed. They're going to wake up tomorrow in pain. No matter what medication, how many doctors see, they're in pain. And so the thing is, I want to end this pain. If you can't end the pain, then I'm going to end my life. That's kind of the thing that creeps in. So we're talking about suffering. As Catholics, we look at Jesus Christ. Right? We look at the suffering that he went through, and what was the purpose? Like, some people look at that guy. Look at that guy. He got beat up, and now he lost on the cross. Look at that.
Right.
He's weak. He's powerless. Look at that. Right. And people see that as weakness, but no, he did that in order to show that not even suffering and death is greater than God's love.
Amen.
He suffered for us out of love. So there was a meaning in that suffering. So Jesus crucified teaches us that we also have to find the meaning in our suffering. Since everybody's going to suffer, there's no way we can avoid it.
Right.
What is this saying right now? And the fact we don't lose our dignity and our humanity because we are suffering.
No.
But that's what happens. That's why people want to take their own life. That's what, I'm so in pain. I don't want to live like this.
I'm not useful anymore.
Right. And there's no meaning. There's no suffering. So just end it.
End it.
That's the tendency. But we have to learn to find what meanings does my life have now in this moment of suffering.
Right.
And for us, we always look to Christ and the redemption that he brought to us through that suffering and uniting it with him.
And that's the key is finding that meaning, because what the world proposes is, and this is the lie that comes from the depths of hell, that this world is all there is, right? The devil is a lot less concerned for you to worship him than he is for you to just to make sure that you're not worshiping God, that you don't believe in God. He's perfectly fine with you not believing in the devil as long as you also don't believe in God. Because when we believe in God and when we look to Christ as our Savior, and when we are initiated Christians and we're living a sacramental life, there's power there and there's dignity there. And even if we aren't Christian, every person has incredible dignity, every human life. But every human life has incredible dignity because of what God made it for, because of the way that God made every human life, which is that we are both natural and supernatural, each of us. Like we are incredible beings. We are incredible in a way that the angels are not. The angels are only spirit. They have no corporeal nature. They're not physical. Animals here on earth are corporeal creatures. They have no spiritual nature. We are physical and spiritual. We are set apart in all of creation. We're incredible beings. But when you pull out of that, when you extract out of what we are, the spiritual component, then the only thing that matters is the pursuit of pleasure and the avoidance of pain.
Yes.
The pursuit of pleasure and the avoidance of pain becomes the God that we are constantly worshiping.
Right,
And when we're pursuing pleasure and avoiding pain, of course we're going to jump at the opportunity. If we have that chronic illness or whatever, like, hey, if this is going to be my existence for the rest of this time here on this rock floating through space,
do it.
take me out of this rock. I don't want to be on this rock anymore. But that's such a short-sighted scope of vision, but that's why that lie is so dangerous, and it's sinister. It's so sad.
Right.
Yeah, and what we recognize as people of faith from the scripture, right? 2 Peter chapter 1, verse 4 says we are partakers in the divine nature.
Oof,
right?
yes.
So there's something about our nature
Yes.
Beautiful.
that has that spark of God's life. We also see 1 Corinthians 6:19, Paul says our bodies are temples of the Holy Spirit that we have within us from God.
Yep.
So you are not your own.
Mm-hmm.
You've been bought with a price, so glorify God in your body. You know, and then of course, Genesis chapter 2, verse 9, the beautiful phrase, and God breathed into our nostrils the breath of life. Nishmak ruach chaim, where God literally takes the breath of his divine life and pours that life into us. So to your point, Nick, there's something special and unique about our humanity that's unlike any other creature in the universe. But when we're in pain, we almost distance ourselves from that because we're so focused on the pain, we're so focused on the immediacy of what's going on with our bodies, we forget that there's a spiritual dimension that's also
that
part
we're
of
the
it
temple
as well.
of the Lord. We forget that. And suffering doesn't only have to be physical. I mean, there's a lot. There's emotional.
Well, remember,
yeah.
assisted suicide is also for mental.
Yeah, there's
It's not just physical
Yep.
illness, but mental illness as well.
Yep.
So you're absolutely right.
It's awful.
Yeah,
It's
there's,
awful.
and I think all of us have been impacted somewhere in our life with a friend or family. I believe in another episode you mentioned that you had a dear friend that chose not to participate in this life any longer, which is very hard.
Yeah, two of the guys that I grew up with, small Catholic school, small Catholic class, and two of those friends from that class have committed suicide now.
That's terrible.
And if we don't speak out about issues like this, for euthanasia, for example, society is going to start to pass laws where they're going to euthanize people without their knowledge or consent. Look what happened in England a few years back with these two children, Charlie Gard and Alfie Evans.
That was terrible.
Right? I mean, these are babies with diseases.
Right.
And so what happened? The United States and Italy granted citizenship to them so that they can leave the hospital to come to seek
And we
some
would
kind
have
of
taken care of
treatment.
them.
And the state and England said no. An extraordinary statement by one of the ethicists in England said that those children don't belong to their parents. They belong to the state. The parents' job is the best interest of those children. And since parents can't make those decisions, the state will make those decisions. They didn't even allow those children to go home to die.
That is so dystopian. That is
It is. I mean, but we're here already.
We're there.
This is not just something from a book about some dystopian future of the church.
Yeah.
I mean, dystopian future of the culture. We're here now. And unless we speak out about these issues, unless we begin to really teach people about the dignity of human life, we're going to see more and more and more of this start spreading throughout the world.
And finding that meaning, going back to that prior point that you had made, Deacon, it's at the heart of everything that troubles us as a society. That to me is why, because I struggled to understand my own dignity or understand what my meaning was. What I did discover was the void, the vacuum that was everything that I'd been living for up to that point, which was my own fame, my own glory, my richness. I was living life for that, and I found it so empty, and it was. And that to me is why the teachings of Pope St. John Paul II's theology of the body were so healing for me, because I found in it my purpose, my meaning, and everybody can. Those
Yeah.
teachings are so they're about every person, they're about every relationship, they're about every marriage, and they're about all of humanity. Those teachings are so comprehensive about the human person and our purpose and our meaning, and like the ways that I have found healing through those teachings. Like I just am such a huge proponent and advocate for the spreading of the good news, the gospel, in a sense, of the theology of the body, because we were made for relationship with God, and when we focus on the temporary struggles, they become a distraction that keeps us from keeping our gaze on what is ahead, which is an eternity with God, the beatific vision, the perfect union with Him and with each other, and it's just like incredible stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I mean, God's grace is amazing to me too, because I remember when I was listening to Father Chris Alar, he was talking about how his grandmother committed suicide, and a lot of people have the misconception that everybody that commits suicide automatically goes to hell. And I think you've spoken on it before, Deacon, that, if there's a mental incapacity or something, or they weren't in their right mind, or they could have been on medication. I mean, there's a litany of reasons why people may do something like that. Could be an addiction, which is also a mental illness or a medical condition. They may not have made the decision with freedom to do that. And so this Father Alar spoke to the fact that when he spoke to, I believe his spiritual director, he said, you need to pray for their soul, because, and pray for them even after they may have decided to take the euthanasia or the medically assisted suicide. Like you were saying, those babies, the children that were taken by the state and, killed, for lack of a better description, it wasn't their choice. You know what I mean? But just as Catholics, we should pray for them. You know what I mean? And we should do that because God's outside of time. So and he knows the true intention of the heart. So somebody who may have done those things, we can't condemn them. You know what I mean? We have to love them even in their absence, and pray that maybe there was something, so there might be something redemptive out of that. You know what I mean? Which I think, it causes great suffering when somebody does something, euthanasia or suicide, it causes suffering across the board.
Yeah.
But we, as the survivors of that act that these other people did, should be able to take that suffering that we're feeling and use it redemptively, like you said, to pray for them and to pray for their families and to pray for all the people that are hurting for their loss or this, whatever has happened. I think that's another way to look at redemptive suffering.
And this is why we have to evangelize, because a lot of people you're talking about, they have no spiritual foundation whatsoever.
Right. They might not even know God.
Well, it's very, well, Nick says, very Epicurean. Epicurus was the guy, the Roman guy who developed this idea of in order to find meaning in life, you have to maximize pleasure. And so what was good were those things that brought pleasure, and what was bad in life were those things that brought pain. And at the end of your life, there's nothing.
No,
and so you live for pleasure, you minimize pain. At the end of your life, you just die, and that's it.
That's sad.
That's called Epicureanism after him. And so that there's still a lot of that in our culture today.
Oh yeah.
And that's why we have to evangelize, to awaken the spirit, to the fact of the spiritual dimension does exist, and it's real.
And that's why we called Awaken Catholic. Awaken. I mean, that's truly what's behind that.
Yeah. So we have to awaken people's knowledge to the truth,
right?
Awaken people to God's incredible divine mercy and love, awaken people to the fact that there is this beautiful spiritual dimension, that even in the midst of pain, God's love is still there. God's love is still active and working. And that, again, everybody's going to go through some kind of suffering. And that there is a richness and a depth there, because there's a meaning there that they're not seeing and they don't want to see. Because here's the danger. Here's the danger, and we're moving toward this kind of socialist thinking more and more in our culture today.
Unfortunately,
your value lies in your ability to contribute to society.
The utilitarian
so, for example, exactly. So when you're old and you're sick, right, and now you're in the walker and people have to change your diaper and you have to depend on people, the society is going to say, well, look, you're a burden to your family. You're a burden on society. You're a burden on the healthcare system.
You're too expensive to take care of.
Exactly. We got two choices for you. We'll kill you.
Or you can kill yourself.
Euthanasia, or you can kill yourself, assisted suicide. And we're already there.
In some countries,
in this world, and it's and if we don't effectively preach Jesus Christ, that's why we can't keep this to ourselves. Unless we do that, this is going to continue to spread and take root, and more and more people are going to needlessly die because the culture says your life is meaningless because we determine when you're valuable and when you're not valuable.
And then the other side of it is I can't remember what the percentages are, is the people that now identify as the nuns, NONES. But if they have no faith at all, agnostic, atheist, or just don't believe anything, which I think is probably sadder in a way, they don't have any value on life. They only see themselves as utilitarian. They only see themselves as living, doing what they need to do, materialism, and then what happens when I can't provide, they don't care. Or if something goes wrong, they don't have that intimate personal relationship that Jesus really wants with them. And I'm praying that, they find that, you know what I mean? And that maybe somehow God will bring somebody into their lives that will teach them that they have value and that God lives within them. And, and when they were conceived, he put himself inside them. He gave you a soul. And it's a beautiful thing that he loves us so much that he wants to be within us and reside within us until he can bring us back home when we die a natural death.
And we have to make I think we have to make a little distinction here with the saints. Because some of the saints, like, was it Nations of Antioch? They're going to feed me to the lions. When that happens, don't try to save me. If I yell out, help, don't listen to me because I really want to be with Jesus. So as they're tearing me to pieces, they look forward to suffering. Like I want to be a martyr. I can't wait to die for Jesus in the faith. And they take me and rip my toenails out, and I'm like, what the heck is wrong with you?
That's not going to be me.
Your first instinct is, what the heck's wrong with you? You want suffering? You want to die? You want to do? But the saints are so in love with Christ. They want to suffer like him.
Right.
They want to be so like Christ that they want to endure suffering that Christ endured. So it's not like some morbid thing. I can't wait to be beaten. Or they used to do self-flagellation. They used to beat themselves with whips or go through all kinds of really painfully ascetical kinds of practices that make you go, whoa, dude, what's going on here?
And then look at the saints during the plagues. They were fearless. They knew that they were going to die. I mean, the majority of them, you know what I mean? But they didn't care. They went in and they cared for the sick and they took care of them and they comforted them and they were with them and gave them last rites and did what they needed to do, knowing that their life was going to be probably taken because of it, but they didn't care.
Yeah, so I just want to make the point that they don't see their lives as valueless. They don't see it, but they just want to be so like Christ that they want to endure what Christ endured because that will bring them closer to intimacy with Christ. So it's not like, I can't wait to suffer because this morbid fascination with suffering that I have. It has nothing to do with it. And most people aren't like that. But again, they are so one with Christ in mind, heart, and soul, that they willingly want to endure suffering so they can enter more into that witness that Christ gave, so they can see themselves witnessing in the same way by suffering.
That's beautiful.
Yeah.
Have you had any experiences with any of that, or had suicide or anything in your?
Well, yeah. So my mom was. She died natural causes, but that fear that she had was one. One of my daughter's friends committed suicide. In fact, his father's a deacon. And it was very tragic. Very, very smart kid. Very sharp. But he left a note and stuff like that. He just couldn't deal with all the mental. Again, it was mental health issues. Mental illness. When my mom was living with near my sister in Alabama, a priest, one of the newly ordained priests, it was great because his father was a deacon in the parish where he was assigned.
Aww.
So you have a father and son.
Nice.
The son's a priest, dad's a deacon, and priest didn't show up for mass. And we looked for him. He killed himself. Because he was hearing the voices, he couldn't. So you're right. Mental illness, takes away some of the culpability,
correct,
for suicide because there's other factors that are involved.
Right.
So those are some experiences I've had with that. But
it's hard.
Yeah, or having mostly it's as a deacon, people calling me, wanting to talk through those kinds of issues that they're dealing with a family member or a loved one, and how am I to think about this? How do I talk to them about this, that kind of stuff?
Well, that's nice that they reach out. That's encouraging. Yeah, my youngest daughter, she's lost 7 or 8 of her friends. She's only 23.
Wow.
That's suicide.
And so many young people, especially coming out of the pandemic, the despair, the hopelessness.
Never mind
so
the drug
many young
addiction and the
people.
addictions and all the other stuff.
It's on the rise, because they don't see. And that's why, gosh, we have to do a much better job as Catholics witnessing to the power of God's love.
Correct.
They need to see.
You have to love them where they are, but you've got to demonstrate God's love.
Yeah, it's not enough to talk about. It's not enough to theorize. It's not enough to go to this website.
Right.
We have to engage people in the heart.
Yep.
We have to not be afraid to share that pain. To have that empathy.
Right.
To not be afraid to engage someone and say, I understand. I'm with you.
Yeah.
I'm here with you. I'm here for you. You're not alone in this.
Right.
To give people a sense of hope again.
That's important.
And maybe it's through that experience where they get to really know Jesus Christ in a much different way.
Yeah, that'd be beautiful.
Yeah. Amen.
Well, thank you very much for tuning in for this episode. It's a hard subject, and we have to pray and we have to love one another, and and live that example that Deacon and Nick and I have been talking about. So, thank you very much for joining us. Please go to your app store if you do not have the Awaken app already. You go to the awakenapp.io on your Google Play Store or your Apple Store, and you can download it, and then you can get more podcasts and more of this podcast and music and all kinds of really good information and content, and we would love it if you would do that. And then also Deacon's going to tell you how you can support us if you really like what you're seeing, because we really, really would love your support.
Just go to theprodigallife.com, and there you will see our patron page where you can donate at different levels of giving, and we've tied those different giving tiers and levels to the hierarchy of angels. So you can literally become an angel investor in the Prodigal Life podcast.
Yep. And then if you're a business owner or a foundation or a church or anything, and you have dollars that you would like to sponsor because you believe in this content, we would love to have your sponsorship. So please reach out on our website, awakencatholic.org, and we would love to get in touch with you. And God bless you, and we'll see you next week.